everyone, welcome to Aston University's English How-To series. In today's short video I'm going to talk you through how to go about applying for ethics approval and specifically that application process. So I'm going to go through what kinds of details you need to include, how to go about gaining approval before you start a project. So if you're carrying out a study that involves primary data, either generation or collection from human participants, it's highly likely you'll need to go through this ethics application process. Something just to be very clear about from the outset is that you must receive ethics approval before you begin your project. That's really important, and is something which the university guidelines are very strict on as well. So if you don't receive ethics approval, it may be that you'll receive a 0 mark for your work. So it's really important to have that go through this process before you start your study. One of the reasons why it's so important to go through the process is that it's a bit of a kind of quality check and also a sort of safety net at the same time. As it says here, this process ensures that you're carrying out research appropriately, responsibly and safely, and that you're following established methodological protocols. So just as a kind of an extra, as I said, a kind of quality check to check that what you're doing is appropriate, is responsible, is following these established protocols effectively. The types of research then, or student coursework that will always need to be reviewed via this ethics process include interviews, and this can be both formal and informal ones as well. So the formality doesn't actually have a bearing on it. So say you wanted to interview your mum about something, that would still need to go through this ethics approval process. Questionnaires and surveys also needs ethics clearance, ethics approval. Any observation or recording of speech or behaviour, and also any use of personal documents such as diaries or emails, anything that is very personal. The following are likely to be examples of research that won't need ethical review. So these include things such as using literary or artistic criticism, research using material that's already in the public domain, so things like newspapers or interviews that have been broadcast on TV or online elsewhere. And finally, the analysis of anonymised records and or data sets that already exist in the public domain, so things that are freely accessible and available. Don't tend to require this ethical review, with the caveat unless it could potentially be or reveal sensitive data. If you are unsure about whether your project requires ethics approval, then get in touch with your module tutor. They will be able to advise you about what would need approval and what studies wouldn't necessarily need it. So the ethics form itself then, so what you'd be required to do before you begin your study is to fill out an ethics form and submit this to your module tutor. So your module tutor or your project supervisor will be the one who grants ethics approval and who formally signs off on your project. So it's a good idea to kind of speak with them if you have any questions early on in the process, and to talk through your ideas at an early stage. So these are the questions then on the ethics form that you'll be required to fill out. The ethics form itself is available on the school intranet, the university intranet, so you should be able to find a copy online as well quite easily. The questions that you'll be asked include: what are the aims of your research? What research methods do you intend to use? And you'll also be asked to give details of the type of informant, the method of access and sampling, and the locations of your fieldwork as well. So say for example you're carrying out a critical discourse analysis of some data, maybe you recorded someone speaking, so you'd identify maybe 2 or 3 research aims for your projects under question 1. Under question 2 you'd be talking about the framework that you're using. So I'm carrying out a critical discourse analysis looking at speech patterns X, Y and Z in my study. And in question 3 then you give the details of the type of informant and also the kind of the sampling. So how many people are you interviewing, how many people have you recorded, if it's a survey have you gone for 50 people, are you specifically interested in students who are studying English literature degrees and they're the sample that you're going for, or are you going for a cross-section of the public, etc. So it doesn't have to be too detailed, but you do need to give an overview of the types of informants and participants that you'll be including in your study under this question. Questions 4 and 5 go hand in hand, and these are ones that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail shortly. So these are the sort of central ones, if you like, of the form. So please give full details of all ethical issues that arise from the research. And question 5 asks you how are you going to address those issues that you've identified. Question 6 and 7 again kind of go together. So what issues for the personal safety of the researchers arise from the research? And finally, what steps will be taken to minimise those risks? Okay, so let's break down questions 4 and 5 then. So these are the kinds of things which you would expect to see on an ethics application form. Again, this will vary according to your, from study to study, depending on what you're looking at. So there may be some variation in this, but these are some central issues which I think is best to kind of address explicitly in your form. So firstly then, informed consent is important. Participants in your study should fully understand the purpose and reasons behind the research. They should also have a right to withdraw, so they should be able to acknowledge that they can withdraw at any time in the study. So if they get halfway through the survey and they don't quite fancy finishing the rest, they should be able to withdraw with no negative repercussions. The respect for participant confidentiality and anonymity is also very important. And finally, participation should always be voluntary, so you shouldn't be strong-arming or twisting someone's arm to take part in a study. It should be done through an entirely voluntary capacity, so no coercion taking place, and they don't feel threatened to take part in your project. So as I said then, question 5 asks you what you're doing to address those ethical issues. So again, just to revisit those, so informed consent, this can be addressed by ensuring that participants are fully informed of the details of the research, and I'll say a little bit more about how you can address that shortly. Again, with participants' right to withdraw, they should be informed by you at the beginning of the study that they can withdraw at any time if they wish to. In terms of respecting participant confidentiality and anonymity, you should make it very, very clear that no one other than yourself will have access to the recordings or the data that you collect, and that they will be destroyed once they've been transcribed. Also, that names and any details of participants will be changed and anonymised in your writing up to maintain confidentiality. So that's a really, really important thing. You should anonymise your data that you collect. And finally then, with voluntary participation, the participants should be informed that it's a voluntary participation and they have the right to refuse if they don't really fancy taking part. Questions 6 and 7 then, as I mentioned earlier, relate to personal safety of the researcher and how you're going to go about minimising that personal safety. For English, it's very unlikely that there'll be anything too detailed for these questions. But something which came up recently was in recent applications that I've reviewed has been the COVID-19 situation. So students recently have been carrying out surveys, or rather were planning to do interviews. In this particular part of their form, they mentioned that the COVID-19 situation was disrupting their study, and in terms of minimising that risk, rather than carrying out a face-to-face interview, they decided to carry it out over the phone, or in the case of surveys, to do it online rather than in person. So again, that should be fairly clear and will vary from project to project. So some final bits and bobs in terms of kind of documents that you should also prepare in the ethics application process, and in addition to the ethics form that we've just gone through. So you should provide a participant information sheet or a document that you give to your participants. So say you're taking a survey with some people online, this will be something which you would include at the beginning of that survey. This is the document that includes the title of the project, your contact details and your name, and any other kind of helpful contextual information about the study. So why they've been chosen, some simple instructions, and maybe an overview of how long it'll take to complete. So say it'll be 15 minutes to do the survey, and any further relevant information about the data collection and so on. So you should create one of these, but your participants should be able to have access to that easily. You should also put together a consent form, and this is what you do kind of keep a copy of. So this is where participants will just confirm that they understand the aims of the project and they're willing to take part and they're happy to take part. So they should sign this, you should sign this, you should keep that somewhere safe, because that just confirms their consent to take part in the study. So finally then, what to submit. So a little checklist here, because I mentioned a few different documents. So you should submit the ethics form itself to your module tutor, project supervisor, as I've mentioned. If you're planning to carry out a questionnaire, survey or interview, you'll additionally need to send copies of the consent form and the participant information sheet, which I've just mentioned here, but also, and very, very importantly, the survey or the questions that you're planning to ask your participants. This is the bit that people often forget actually with the process, but we need to know what you're planning to ask and the nature of the question. So do include a copy or a draft of the survey or the kind of interview questions that you've put together as well. Right, so that's a very brief overview then of the ethics application process. If you do have any other questions or if anything's not clear, please feel free to get in touch with me, and here's my email.